Friends, I have something wonderful for you. A Russian philosopher, an outright fascist, and also one of the authors of the Russian world concept, shared his opinion about what he saw or heard yesterday at the United Nations General Assembly. And it's simply impossible to retell this. I think this needs to be read directly. So he comments for one of the Russian blogger Telegram channels. He says this: while in America different people are making all sorts of loud statements, I'll say a couple of important things. First, I'm glad that explosions are being heard in our capital. I'm waiting for more missiles to hit Moscow. I've talked about this before. I'm sure that after this, the residents of Moscow and the Moscow region will rise up and go fight for Russia's future, will stop their aimless, peaceful existence, and will become heroes. Here, heroes is capitalized. Second, I want to remind you that Russia will be at war for at least another 16 years. And with each passing year, with every Russian soldier who dies, we will only grow stronger. No one should forget this. That's not all, friends. If you thought that was it, there's more, because there's also a great bit about Ukrainian long-range drone strikes on Russian oil refineries and the idea of banning the purchase of Russian oil in the European Union. I'll just be brief. Here's another quote. Our oil is just as important as the blood of a Russian soldier. Metaphysically speaking, it is sacred. How could anyone possibly refuse to buy what is considered a sacred and invaluable energy source? I even get the very strong impression that Dugin, well, okay, he apparently fell out of some tree and everything's fine, but it really seems like this particular person is completely oblivious or perhaps entirely unaware to what is actually happening to all of the oil refineries that are currently operating within the Russian Federation today. What oil? What pumping? Sanctions really might never come in the necessary amount. And of course, Dugin builds all his speeches on this. But on the other hand, the average Russian who, according to Dugin's philosophy, could potentially become a hero, but instead continues to sit around in his apartment somewhere in Moscow or the Moscow region, just like Dugin himself, in fact. Well, this average Russian, in Dugin's view, obviously doesn't have a car, still doesn't have that white Lada that needs to be filled up, because the sacred energy carrier and sacred fuel in the Russian Federation are now unavailable to the potential hero of the war, the hero of the special military operation. So what's actually happening with us right now? Let me just lift the curtain a little for Dugin as well. We now have problems with gas stations, especially with the lack of fuel. These problems are now spreading from the Far East, from Siberia, basically across the entire territory of the Russian Federation. Today, the first issues are being recorded in the Moscow region and the Leningrad region. It's not just, friends, about lines. There are kilometer-long queues, and there's literally nothing to refuel with. In annexed Crimea, in Feodosia, and Simferopol, gasoline has run out completely. There's none at all. As of today, only diesel is available, and even then, in a very, very limited quantity. I have a video with commentary that was shared by the Telegram channel Crimean Wind. Just feel this wonderful atmosphere all about the sacred Russian gasoline.
At the Tez Atan gas station, there's no gasoline at all in the city. Only diesel is available. They brought in 95 octane gasoline to the Sevastopol gas station at 83.5 per liter. All of this is the line for the gas station. Most likely it will all be bought up soon. They delivered it with 2 tank trucks. Well, that's pretty much it.
Friends, I want to return once again to this statement by Dugin, who claims that Russia will be at war for 16 years. And he builds this whole argument about why, in theory, Russia could endure, so to speak, this 16-year marathon, even though everything is already stretched thin and could snap at any moment. And we all understand this, and even those in Putin's inner circle understand it too. Maybe not Putin himself, who continues to listen to and read Dugin's books, but those around Putin understand this. Why? Because the so-called special military operation is now, well, in fact, reaching its, if not logical, then forced conclusion due to the complete lack of motivation among interregional and regional elites to support or sustain it financially. And in fact, the willingness of the Russian financial system to continue tolerating all of this is also highly questionable. Long-range war, this overwhelming use of drones, the barrage of long-range strikes. This is currently the only thing the Russian Federation can actually offer, since operational success on the front line today does not exist. Only propaganda. Bloggers keep reporting on some square meters that they are heroically capturing. But if you have read or watched my review regarding Rogozin's big interview, he's a senator in the Zaporizhia region on the occupied territory, who is basically in exile there. and by the way, a former head of Roscosmos, former chairman of the Federation Council. So, from a political standpoint, he's a significant figure in the Russian Federation. However, for reasons known to the Kremlin and Putin, he was essentially written off from the political Olympus. And now, not only is he lying low, he even got wounded in the backside back in I think, 2023 or maybe 2015, in 2022. But the point is, he continues to command some kind of people's self-defense force within this occupied territory of Zaporizhia. Biletsky officially appointed him as a senator. And just yesterday, he delivered a significant and impactful speech on the topic of the stalemate at the front. And he refers precisely to this logic, explicitly stating and emphasizing that long-range drones, as well as drones in general, are already, without any doubt, undoubtedly creating buffer zones. Areas that are approximately about 20 kilometers wide, where only hares can run freely because everything is scorched, burned, and devastated. There's nowhere at all to hide. And no sensible, reasonable, or prudent military commander can send their people, their soldiers, or their units there. Next, he specifically touches on the story of the Kherson region, mentioning some idiotic, as he puts it, ideas coming from the Kremlin regarding possible operations and their planning for crossing the Dnipro River. According to Rogozin, this is absolutely impossible. In other words, a deadlock means that the front has come to a halt and no mechanized or infantry breakthroughs are possible anymore. Because the paradigm of today's war is a technological one. By technological, as I understand it, Rogozin means the use of technical means without the actual presence of live forces in real combat engagements. That will no longer happen. After 3.5 years, this is becoming obvious even to a military leader of Rogozin's level. And it is also becoming clear to other military leaders as well. I will talk more about this later. But what's most interesting is that in unison with Rogozin, I don't think it's a direct copy, nor do I think it's just a coincidence. But Valery Zaluzhny has published another column in which he also reflects on the deadlock that has now arisen in the operations being conducted at the front. And he breaks down this deadlock step by step, using, for example, the Kursk operation as an illustration. Zaluzhny openly admits that since he was not involved in planning this operation, he cannot judge how effective it was, considering the percentage of losses, our people, Ukrainian soldiers, and the percentage of effect, the efficiency that was achieved in the Kursk region. In Zaluzhny's opinion, it's not exactly a failure, but it wasn't worth the effort, since despite some tactical and situational successes, they were unable to achieve any kind of operational breakthrough. And with this example, Zaluzhny essentially builds the same logic as Rogozin. That's it, we won't see any more advances. The desire to keep fighting may run up against either defensive lines or very heavy losses. And this, friends, I'm saying simply so that we can look at this whole story objectively. So in fact, the only thing that the current format of this so-called special military operation, or war as they call it, can offer today are strikes on Russian oil refineries and these missile and drone attacks by the Russian Federation on Ukrainian energy facilities and civilian infrastructure. By the way, the Kremlin is already admitting it. Peskov let it slip today that yes, the war is ongoing and we must win. But this is just rhetoric that cannot withstand any criticism today, neither from a military nor an economic standpoint. Elvira Nabiullina, if you don't know, is the head of the Russian central bank, essentially the equivalent of Ukraine's national bank. And she says that there are major problems in the economy precisely because of this so-called special military operation. If it doesn't stop, there will be a complete collapse. At this moment, the government of the Russian Federation is preparing to officially approve the budget for the next year, which notably includes some tax increases. For the time being, this specifically concerns an increase in the VAT, or value-added tax, which is set to go up by 2%. But along with this, all benefits for socially vulnerable groups are being completely eliminated. That's all there is to it. There you have your sanctions, there you have your special military operation, and there you have the large-scale payments and soaring prices for the special military operation, which even now, well, look, if Nabiullina, and by the way, she has already received a warning, if she doesn't keep her mouth shut, Putin will simply remove her from this position. But to place the full responsibility for the collapse on her, and remember her phrase that became a total meme, negative growth, she doesn't want to deal with that. She just wants to be a bystander next to those columns and charts about negative growth in the Russian Federation. This does her no credit and will ruin her career even without Putin. That's why this voice is growing deeper, bigger, stronger, and louder. And as for the budgets, specifically the regional ones, the budgets in the federal subjects, which have been inflated incredibly due to this so-called, in quotes, motivation for future heroes of the special military operation, as Dugin writes, which is actually where I started. Well, excuse me, but even in Russia itself, they are already acknowledging that, for example, the mobilization sign-up bonus of 4 million rubles, such a case was recently recorded literally in Krasnodar Krai, is not a normal situation. And that's exactly why we shouldn't be surprised or dismiss as fake the stories about, for example, the hacking of the governor's emails in the Amur region, where as many as 12 signatories from 12 Russian regions insist that Putin in some form should simply end the special military operation. Here you have a dead end, here you have an economic story, here you have the story with gas stations, oil refineries, and so on, spreading across all of Russia today. Here you have the reason to be dissatisfied. Here's the reason for every citizen of the Russian Federation to experience for themselves what Ukrainians felt in April and May of 2022. For those who have forgotten, let me remind you there were terrible problems, but we managed to stabilize the situation. And here is the reason for this guy to show up again. Yes, with his incredible philosophical musings about how we'll hold out for another 16 years, and that it's time to stop sitting in your apartments, become heroes. I'm waiting for strikes on Moscow. Dugin, you'll most likely live to see a strike on Moscow, but your own compatriots simply won't forgive you for a war dragged out over 16